These are two things we couldn't do while the database was running our application. We'd have to kick the users out and schedule a maintenance window. We can now do this while everybody else is still running the old version. So for this, I'm going to create a demo account. This will hold our application. And I'm just going to grant create session and create procedure to this account so it can install code. And then as the DBA, I'm going to create that version 2 that I was talking about. We call it an addition, a new edition of your code, a new version of your code. All 11G databases come with a default version or default edition called or a $base. You're going to create child editions of that base version. Think of or a $base like the baseline version of your code. When I created version 2, it didn't copy everything in the version 2. It just set up a bunch of pointers from version 2 back to or a $base. We inherit all the code. So right now, I actually have 2 versions in my database. The initial version 1 called or a $base and version 2. They just happen to be identical right now. So I connect as my demo account and I install my application. It just has 2 simple procedures. The first procedure, though, it has a bug in it. We're going to need to fix it. So we've got the procedure in place. If we run it, it does exactly what you expect. Prints out the output, says, I am version 1. Right now, the demo user can't use this new version, this new edition yet. We're going to have to give them the privilege to use this. So the DBA has a fine degree of control over who can use this and what versions people can use. I log back in as the DBA, and I alter the user demo enable additions. This, in effect, gives that schema the permission to create multiple versions of its code. Further, I, as the DBA, explicitly say that user can use version 2. It might be that the demo user is allowed to create versions, but they're not allowed to use version 3 because version 3, they're not supposed to be making any changes. So the DBA decides who can use this capability and what versions explicitly they're allowed to see. I'm also going to allow Scott to see version 2, but Scott can't create any versions of code because I didn't alter user Scott enable additions. Scott is going to be able to test the new code. Scott will be able to see version 2. The DBA can see version 2, the demo user can see version 2, but regular end users like you guys, the only thing you see is or a $base, the original baseline code. So you're not going to see these changes, you're not going to be affected by these changes. That's the good part of this. This is what this is trying to accomplish. So I log back in as the demo account, and I alter my session to be in version 2, and I look in the data dictionary, and I can see I have my 2 stored procedures. And I can see that right now they're both inherited from the baseline version. Since I've switched my session's current edition to version 2, when I do this create or replace procedure, it's doing it in version 2. It's left version 1 alone. So I put in the fixed code. I am fixed in version 2.0. If I look in the data dictionary, initially it looks not much different from what I expect to see today. There's still just 2 procedures. And there really is just 2 procedures. It just happens that one of them has more than one version. And they've given us new views that end in _AE for all additions to look across all the different versions in the schema. So here I can see that I actually have my procedure 2. I just have 2 occurrences of my procedure. One in the baseline version and one in the current version, version 2 that I'm working in. The demo user also is going to fix that grant that I had talked about. We had forgotten to grant execute on something to a particular individual or a role. I can do that in this version. And again, this will not block people in version 1 in or a $base. This grant happens in isolation in this new edition. Now if I look in the data dictionary, it looks like there's still 2 procedures. They're both in version 2 now. When I did that second grant on my procedure 2, it had to copy an instance of that code in here so that we could associate the grant with the copy of the code. Because the grant doesn't exist in version 1, only exists in version 2. I now have 4 copies of procedures. I have 2 procedures. Each of them have 2 instances. as of different versions. I'm in version 2. As the demo user, if I run the code, it runs the version 2 instance. Anybody who just logs in, by default, will be in the database's current edition, which is the baseline. They see version 1 of the code. They haven't been affected by the fact that I installed other code. When you do that create or replace, you probably invalidate 5 other packages too. You're going to do a lot of compiling. You're going to do a lot of compiling in that schema to patch or upgrade to version 2. This allows you to do all those changes while version 1 is running. If I set the edition to version 2, because I'm allowed to, I see the version 2 of the code. So your existing end users run the old copy. The new demo account can see either one of them at will and can install into version 2 safely. Further, Scott can log in. Scott's the account we're going to use to test with. It's in $or base by default. It tries to execute my procedure 2, and that fails. It fails because in version 1, he didn't have the grant to run that. But if he changes his session to be in version 2, all of a sudden he can execute that. So you can use this to test out and make sure that all the changes took place, everything's correct. Now the DBA is ready to release the code into production. What did they need to do? The simplest thing for them to do right now is to quiesce the database. What that does is it lets all existing transactions finish, but stops anybody from starting a new one. And then they issue an altered database to set the current edition to version 2, and they unquiesce the database. Everybody all of a sudden is running version 2 of the code. No blocking, no contention, and every change you put in place, if you had to create or replace 10 procedures, they all get released as one command, not as 10 separate individual commands. So in the simplest form, this allows you to stage all of the code changes and then release it at once. There's a more complex way to do this, of course. It's the database. There's got to be an easy way, and there's got to be a really hard way. There's a way to do this so that you can actually run version 1 and version 2 simultaneously. So you don't have to pause anyone. You can let the database connections in your application server that we're using version 1 continue to use version 1 until those connections go away. And eventually everybody's using version 2. And then you can switch over to version 2 completely. To really get into this, I would need like 2 hours to go through this feature. But if you go to otn.oracle.com and you search for edition-based redefinition, you'll get a lot of hits on it, and you'll be able to read about it. But this is a capability we've been waiting for since version 7 came out with stored procedures in the first place. So how do you get there? Here's your possible upgrade paths. In 9i, the terminal release of 9i Release 2, which is version 9208, directly upgrades to 11G Release 2. 10G Release 1, the terminal release, 10.1.0.5, goes to 11G Release 2. If you're on 10G Release 2 or 11G Release 1, it's a lot more flexible. 10G Release 2, anything that's 10.2.0.2 or above can go directly to 11G Release 2, and any previous version of 11G can go there directly. And again, for any of the things I talked about, I would encourage you to go here. I would like to point out that the 3 presentations I did today and all the scripts behind them, I'm going to be bundling up, and I'll get to the organizers of the event, and they'll be able to put on their website. So you don't have to worry about writing down a lot of the URLs and stuff like that. By early next week, you should be able to download it off of the Peru Oracle User Group website. I would like to thank you very much for your time and attention. You guys had the hard job. We never fall asleep on this side of the podium, but staying awake all day out there, I know is a challenge, especially as the temperature in the rooms go up and down and up and down. But you've been great. Glad you could attend, and thank you.